The rain had stopped just an hour ago, leaving the city streets wet and glistening under the streetlights. Robert Chen stood in front of a small thrift store, holding a plastic bag with clothes that smelled like mothballs and old fabric. He was 52 years old, worth over $3 billion, and at this moment, he was about to do something he'd never done before. Inside that bag were torn jeans, a faded jacket with a broken zipper, and shoes that had seen better days. Robert had paid cash for them, watching the elderly shop owner count the bills with arthritic fingers. The old man hadn't recognized him. Why would he? The Robert Chen on magazine covers wore $1,000 suits and Italian leather shoes. The man in front of him just looked like another customer trying to stretch his budget. Robert walked into a nearby coffee shop and changed in the bathroom. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized his own reflection. His expensive haircut now looked unkempt. The designer stubble he usually maintained looked rough and neglected. The clothes hung on him awkwardly, too big in some places, too tight in others. He looked exactly like what he was pretending to be, someone who'd fallen on hard times, but why was he doing this? The question had been nagging at him for months now. Robert had built his hotel empire from nothing. His parents had been immigrants who worked 3 jobs between them, just to keep food on the table. He remembered eating rice and beans for dinner 5 nights a week. He remembered his father's tired eyes and his mother's worn hands. Then 25 years of hard work later, everything changed. The first hotel, then the second, then 10, then 50. Now he owned the Grand Azure Hotel Group, with properties in 12 countries. People bowed when he walked into a room. They laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. They agreed with his opinions even when he was clearly wrong. Last month, something happened that shook him. He'd been having lunch at one of his hotels and he'd watched as his staff practically pushed an elderly man out the door. The man's clothes were shabby and he'd wandered into the lobby looking confused. The security team had been rough, almost cruel. When Robert asked them about it later, they'd shrugged. Just keeping the lobby clean, sir. Can't have people like that scaring away paying guests. People like that. The words had stuck in his mind like a splinter. People like what? People who were poor? People who were struggling? People like his own parents had been? That night, Robert couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the man, about the casual cruelty, about how easily his staff had dismissed another human being, and he wondered, if he showed up at his own hotels looking like that man, how would his employees treat him? Would they see a person who needed help, or would they just see a problem to be removed? So here he was, standing outside the Grand Azure Hotel on 5th Street, his flagship property. The building gleamed like a jewel, all glass and steel and carefully designed lighting. It had cost him $80 million to build. Inside, rooms started at $500 a night. The restaurant had 2 Michelin stars. It was everything he'd worked for, everything he'd dreamed of building. And now he was going to walk in there dressed like he couldn't afford a cup of coffee. Robert's heart was pounding. He felt ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up. Part of him wanted to turn around, go home, forget this whole crazy idea. But another part, the part that still remembered being hungry, being looked down on, being dismissed, pushed him forward. The evening air was cool, and Robert could see his breath in small clouds. It was almost 8 o'clock, and well-dressed guests were arriving for dinner at the hotel restaurant. A couple walked past him, and the woman pulled her designer purse closer to her body. She didn't look at him. To her, he was invisible, or worse, he was something to be avoided. Robert started walking toward the entrance. His worn shoes squeaked slightly on the wet pavement. He could see the hotel's main doors, the uniformed doorman helping guests from their cars, the warm golden light spilling out onto the sidewalk, and then he saw the security guard. The young man was standing near the entrance watching people come and go. He was maybe 28, 30 at most. His uniform was clean and pressed, but Robert could tell it had been washed and ironed many times. The fabric was slightly faded at the elbows. His shoes were polished, but they were old, resoled at least once. The guard's name tag caught the light, Daniel Rodriguez. Robert had probably seen him before during his regular visits, but he'd never really looked at him. Not the way he was looking now. Daniel had an honest face, the kind of face that showed every emotion. Right now, he looked tired. It was probably the end of a long shift. Robert took a deep breath and kept walking. With each step, he felt more exposed, more vulnerable. This was it. This was the test. In a few seconds, he'd know exactly how his employees treated people who had nothing. Several other guests passed him, giving him wide berth. One man actually said "excuse me" in a tone that clearly meant, "Get out of my way." Robert felt his face flush with embarrassment and anger. Was this how it felt? Was this the daily reality for people without money, without status, without power? He was just 20 feet from the entrance now. Daniel had noticed him. The guard's posture had shifted, become more alert. He was watching Robert approach, his hand moving slightly toward the radio on his belt. Robert's throat felt dry. His hands were trembling slightly, and not from the cold. Everything he'd built, everything he believed about his company, about his employees, about human nature, it was all about to be tested. And in that moment, Robert Chen, billionaire hotel mogul, felt more nervous than he'd felt in 30 years. Because he was about to discover something important. Something that might change everything. He was about to discover who his employees really were when they thought nobody important was watching. Daniel had been working security at the Grand Azure Hotel for 2 years now, and he'd learned to read people pretty quickly. You had to in this job. The drunk guests who'd cause problems. The teenagers trying to sneak into the bar. The confused tourists who'd wandered into the wrong hotel. And yes, the homeless folks who sometimes came looking for a warm place to sit or maybe hoping someone would give them some money. But something about this man was different. Daniel watched as Robert approached the entrance, and his first instinct wasn't to call for backup or prepare to escort him away. Instead, he felt something else entirely: concern. The man looked lost, maybe a bit scared. His shoulders were hunched against the evening cold, and there was something in his eyes, a kind of sadness that Daniel recognized all too well. Robert reached the entrance and paused, seeming unsure of himself. Other guests flowed around him like water around a rock, not even acknowledging his presence. One woman actually made a disgusted sound as she passed. Daniel stepped forward. "Evening, sir. Can I help you with something?" The kindness in his voice caught Robert completely off guard. He'd been bracing himself for confrontation, for dismissal, maybe even for being physically removed from the property. But this young man was looking at him, really looking at him like he was a person who mattered. Robert's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. It's cold out here." "It is," Daniel agreed, nodding. "Supposed to drop below freezing tonight." "You have somewhere warm to go?" Robert shook his head, playing his part. "Not really." Daniel glanced back at the hotel entrance, then at Robert again. His supervisor was inside, probably watching the security cameras. Protocol was clear. Keep the entrance clear, maintain the hotel's image, don't let anyone loiter who wasn't a guest. But protocol didn't say anything about basic human decency. "Hold on just a second," Daniel said. He walked over to a small security station near the door and grabbed his lunch bag. When he came back, he pulled out a bottle of water and a protein bar. "Here, you should eat something." Robert stared at the offered items. The water bottle was half frozen, the protein bar slightly squashed. But the gesture hit him harder than any business deal he'd ever closed. "I can't take your food," he said quietly. "Sure you can," Daniel replied with a small smile. "I already ate. This was just extras. Go ahead." Robert took them with shaking hands. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Daniel paused, studying Robert's face. There was something about this man that made him want to do more. "Have you eaten today? Like a real meal?" Robert shook his head again. Daniel pulled out his wallet. It was worn leather, held together with duct tape at one corner. Inside, Robert could see a few bills and some coins. Daniel pulled out a $20 bill and held it out. "There's a diner about 2 blocks that way." Daniel pointed down the street. "Mike's place. They serve hot food until 10. Tell them Daniel sent you. Mike's a friend of mine. This should cover a good meal and maybe some coffee." Robert couldn't believe what he was seeing. $20 might not sound like much to most people, but he could tell from the thin wallet, from the razzled shoes, from the faded uniform, this young man didn't have money to spare. And yet here he was giving it away to a complete stranger. "I can't take this," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "Please," Daniel insisted, pressing the bill into Robert's hand. "I've been where you are. I know how it feels. Just take it, okay? No strings attached." Robert felt his eyes burning. When was the last time someone had shown him genuine kindness without wanting something in return? Without knowing who he was or what he could do for them? He couldn't remember. "Thank you," Robert managed to say. "Really, thank you. Don't mention it." Daniel glanced at his watch. "Listen, my break is in about 15 minutes. If you want to stick around, maybe we can talk. Sometimes it helps, just having someone to talk to." Robert nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He walked over to a bench near the hotel entrance and sat down. The protein bar tasted like cardboard, but he ate it anyway. The water was so cold it hurt his teeth, but he drank it gratefully. He watched Daniel work. The young man helped an elderly couple with their luggage, smiling and chatting with them easily. He gave directions to some tourists. He radioed in to check on a delivery at the service entrance. And through it all, every few minutes, he'd glance over at Robert, just making sure he was okay. 15 minutes later, Daniel's replacement arrived for the shift change. Daniel said something to the other guard, gesturing toward Robert. The other guard nodded, looking less than pleased but agreeable. Daniel walked over and sat down on the bench beside Robert. Up close, Robert could see the weariness in the young man's face, the kind of tired that comes from working too hard for too long. "Tough day?" Robert asked. "Double shift," Daniel admitted, stretching his legs out. "Been here since 6 this morning. That's 14 hours. Yeah, well," Daniel shrugged. "Bills don't pay themselves, They sat in silence for a moment, watching people come and go from the hotel. A limousine pulled up and a man in an expensive suit got out, barking orders at the driver. He didn't say thank you. He didn't even look at the doorman who held the door for him. "See that guy?" Daniel said quietly. "He stays here every month. Tips like garbage, treats the staff like we're invisible. But he's got money, so everyone smiles and bows." "And me?" Robert asked. "I don't have money. Why are you being nice to me?" Daniel looked at him, surprised by the question. "Because you're a person. That's reason enough, isn't it?" The simplicity of the answer nearly broke Robert's heart. "I used to be homeless," Daniel continued, his voice soft. "About 3 years ago. My mom got sick, cancer. The bills just kept coming and coming. I lost my apartment, ended up sleeping in my car for 8 months. I remember what it felt like when people looked through me like I didn't exist. Like I was trash to be stepped over. How did you get out of it?" Robert asked. "A guy helped me," Daniel said, smiling at the memory. "Security guard at a parking garage where I used to park my car to sleep. His name was Tom. He gave me sandwiches, let me use the bathroom to clean up, helped me find this job. He didn't have to do any of that. But he did. And I promised myself that if I ever got the chance, I'd do the same for someone else." Robert felt something shift inside his chest. Here was a young man who'd been through hell and back, who was working 14-hour days, who probably had just enough money to scrape by. And instead of becoming bitter, instead of turning cold, he'd chosen kindness. "Tell me about your mom," Robert said. "Is she okay now?" Daniel's smile faded a little. "She's in remission, thank God. But the treatments cost a fortune. I'm still paying off the debt. And now my little sister's in college. I'm trying to help her so she doesn't end up drowning in student loans like everyone else. That's a lot on your shoulders." "Yeah, but what else am I going to do?" Daniel said. "She's my sister. Mom's my mom. Family takes care of family, right?" They talked for another 20 minutes. Daniel shared stories about growing up in the city, about his dreams of maybe becoming a police officer someday, about the regular guests at the hotel and which ones were decent and which ones weren't. And Robert listened, really listened in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. This wasn't a business negotiation. This wasn't someone pitching him an idea or asking for funding. This was just two human beings talking on a bench, and it felt more real than anything Robert had experienced in a very long time. Finally, Daniel checked his phone and stood up. "I've got to catch my bus. But hey, take my number." He pulled out a business card, just a simple white card with his name and phone number written in blue ink. "If you need anything, and I mean anything, help finding a shelter, a warm meal, someone to talk to, you call me, okay?" Robert took the card, holding it carefully like it was made of gold. "Okay, I mean it," Daniel said seriously. "Nobody should have to go through hard times alone. Promise me you'll call if you need help." "I promise," Robert said, and he meant it. Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Take care of yourself, friend. And get somewhere warm tonight. It's going to be cold." Then he was gone, walking down the street toward the bus stop. His shoulders squared despite his obvious exhaustion. Robert sat there on the bench for a long time, staring at the business card in his hand. Around him, the city continued its evening rush. Expensive cars pulled up to the hotel. Well-dressed people hurried past without seeing him, but one person had seen him. One person had cared. And that one person had just taught him a lesson worth more than all his billions. Robert didn't go home that night. Instead, he walked the 2 blocks to Mike's place, the diner Daniel had mentioned. It was a small corner restaurant with foggy windows and a neon sign that flickered. The kind of place he would have driven past 1,000 times without noticing. Inside, it was warm and smelled like coffee and frying bacon. A handful of people sat at the counter and in the worn vinyl booths. Behind the counter, a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and a stained apron looked up as Robert entered. "We're about to close," the man said, not unkindly. "Daniel sent me," Robert replied, holding up the $20 bill. The man's expression changed immediately, softening into a smile. "Daniel, huh? That kid's got a heart of gold. Sit anywhere you like. What can I get you?" Robert ordered eggs, toast, and coffee. The food came quickly, hot and simple and better than some 5-star meals he'd had. As he ate, he watched the man, Mike, he assumed, work. Mike talked to every customer by name. He refilled coffee without being asked. He laughed at an old man's joke even though it probably wasn't funny. This was Daniel's world, Robert realized. A world where $20 mattered. Where kindness was currency. Where people knew each other's names and cared about each other's problems. When Robert tried to pay, Mike waved him off. "First meal's on the house. Any friend of Daniel's is a friend of mine. But you come back, you hear? And you tell Daniel I said hello." Robert walked out into the cold night with tears in his eyes. He'd spent the evening being invisible, being dismissed, being ignored. And the only 2 people who'd shown him kindness were people who had the least to give. The next morning, Robert stood in his penthouse apartment, looking out at the city skyline. He'd barely slept. His mind kept replaying the previous evening over and over. Daniel's kindness, Mike's generosity, the casual cruelty of the wealthy guests who'd looked through him like he was nothing. He thought about his company, about the empire he'd built. He'd always told himself he was different from other billionaires. He donated to charity. He paid his employees well, or at least he thought he did. He'd convinced himself he was one of the good ones. But was he really? When was the last time he'd talked to one of his security guards? When was the last time he'd asked his housekeeping staff about their lives, their families, their dreams? He knew the names of every executive in his company. But could he name a single person who cleaned his hotels? The truth was uncomfortable. He'd become exactly what he'd once despised, someone so insulated by wealth that he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. Robert picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Clear my schedule for today." "All of it." "Sir, you have the meeting with the investors at 10 and the—" "Cancel everything," Robert said firmly. "Something important has come up." He spent the day doing something he rarely did, research on his own employees. He accessed payroll records, benefits information, employee files. What he found disturbed him. His security guards, including Daniel, made just above minimum wage. No health insurance. No retirement benefits. The shifts were long, the raises were tiny, and the turnover rate was incredibly high. Daniel had worked 14-hour shifts yesterday. That meant he'd probably made about $200 before taxes. And out of that, he'd given Robert $20, 10% of his daily pay to a stranger. Robert sat back in his chair, feeling sick. He was worth $3 billion. He could buy a yacht, a private island, another hotel without thinking twice. And here was Daniel, scraping together money for his mother's medical bills and his sister's education, still finding it in his heart to help others. That evening, Robert put on the same shabby clothes from the thrift store. His assistant had called 3 times, worried. His lawyer had sent urgent emails. But Robert ignored them all. He had something more important to do. He returned to the Grand Azure Hotel just before 8 o'clock. The same time as yesterday. He wanted to see Daniel again. He needed to. But when he arrived, a different guard was at the entrance. Older, with a stern face and cold eyes. Robert approached slowly, and the guard immediately stepped forward, blocking his path. "Keep moving," the guard said. "No loitering. I said keep moving. We don't want your kind here, your kind." The words stung even though Robert had expected them. He was about to leave when he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, Jerry, it's okay. He's with me." Daniel was walking toward them carrying a duffel bag. He must have just finished another shift. His face lit up when he saw Robert. "You came back," Daniel said, genuine happiness in his voice. "I was hoping you would. Did you get that meal yesterday?" "I did," Robert said, his throat tight. "Mike says hello. That's great." "That's really great." Daniel turned to the other guard. "Jerry, this is my friend." "He's okay." Jerry looked doubtful but shrugged and walked back to his post. Daniel gestured to the same bench where they'd sat yesterday. "You got a few minutes?" "I'm not in a rush tonight. Just one shift today." They sat down and Robert found himself telling Daniel a story he'd never planned to tell. Not the truth, not yet, but something close to it. He talked about losing his way, about forgetting what mattered, about being surrounded by people but feeling completely alone. And Daniel listened the way he'd listened yesterday. Without judgment. Without interruption. Just pure, genuine attention. "You know what I think?" Daniel said when Robert finished. "I think you're being too hard on yourself. We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is finding your way back." "How did you stay so kind?" Robert asked. "After everything you went through, how did you not become bitter?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking. "My mom used to say something when I was a kid. She'd say, Daniel, the world's going to be hard on you sometimes. It's going to knock you down. But you get to choose who you become. You can let it make you hard, or you can let it make you kind." I decided to be kind, even when people don't deserve it. "Especially then," Daniel said, "because maybe they need it most. Look, I'm not perfect. I get angry sometimes. I get frustrated. But at the end of the day, I want to be someone who makes the world a little better, you know? Even if it's just in small ways." They talked for over an hour. Daniel told him about his sister, how she was studying to be a teacher, how proud he was of her, how their mom would video call him from the hospital during her treatments, trying to stay cheerful even when she was in pain. "She's my hero," Daniel said simply. She never complained, not once. She'd always say, "We'll get through this." We always do. And we did. Robert felt his chest tighten. "You're working yourself to death to help them." "Nah," Daniel said with a laugh. "I'm young. I can handle it. Besides, what else would I do with my money? Buy fancy stuff I don't need? This way I'm investing in the people I love. That's worth more than anything else." As the evening grew colder, Daniel reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a sweatshirt. "Here, take this. It's clean, I promise. Just washed it yesterday." "Daniel, I can't keep taking things from you." "Sure you can. That's what friends do." Daniel stood up, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "I've got to head out, but same time tomorrow? If you want to talk more, I mean. No pressure." Robert took the sweatshirt, holding it carefully. "Tomorrow. I'll be here." "Good." Daniel smiled, that warm, genuine smile. "And hey, I meant what I said yesterday. If you need help with anything, finding a job, getting into a shelter program, whatever, I've got connections. I'll help you however I can." After Daniel left, Robert sat there for a long time wearing the sweatshirt that probably cost $15 new. It was warmer than any $1,000 jacket he owned. He thought about tomorrow, about what he was going to do. The decision he'd been wrestling with all day suddenly became crystal clear. Tomorrow he would tell Daniel the truth. And then he would do something that might just change both their lives forever. But tonight he just wanted to sit here and remember what it felt like to have a real friend. Someone who cared about him not for his money or his power or what he could do for them. Someone who cared just because he was human. And that, Robert realized, was the rarest gift of all. Robert barely slept that night either. He kept rehearsing what he'd say to Daniel, how he'd explain the deception. Would Daniel understand? Or would he feel betrayed, manipulated, used? At 6 a.m, Robert gave up on sleep. He showered, shaved, and stood in front of his closet for a long time. Row after row of expensive suits stared back at him. He picked a simple navy one, nothing too flashy. When he looked in the mirror, he saw the Robert Chen that the world knew, the billionaire, the businessman, the man in control. But that wasn't who he felt like anymore. His driver was waiting downstairs as always. "Good morning, sir." "Where to?" "The Grand Azure on 5th Street. The driver looked surprised. "We're going to the hotel, sir. You usually have Benjamin drive you there in the other car." "Today's different," Robert said quietly. The drive took 20 minutes. Robert watched the city wake up through the tinted windows. Street vendors setting up their carts. workers heading to early shifts. A whole world of people just trying to make it through another day. When they pulled up to the hotel, Robert sat in the car for a moment, his hand on the door handle. This was it. No going back after this, sir. Are you all right? His driver asked. Yeah, Robert said. I'm okay, just give me a minute. He got out of the car and walked toward the hotel entrance. The morning doorman, someone Robert had probably seen 100 times but never really noticed, opened the door with a deep bow. Good morning, Mr. Chen. Welcome. The lobby was quiet at this hour. A few early risers sat in the restaurant having breakfast. The cleaning crew was polishing the marble floors until they gleamed. And behind the front desk, Robert saw his hotel manager, Patricia, talking with some staff members. Mr. Chen. Patricia rushed over, smoothing her already perfect suit. We weren't expecting you this morning. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, Patricia. I need you to send someone to get Daniel Rodriguez from the security team. Have him come to my office, please. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Daniel from security? Sir, if there's a problem... There's no problem, Robert said firmly. Just send for him, please. Of course, sir. Right away. Robert took the private elevator to the top floor where his office was. The executive suite. He'd designed it himself. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, expensive artwork on the walls, a desk made from a single piece of mahogany. Everything carefully chosen to impress, to intimidate, to show power. Now it all felt hollow. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Somewhere down there, Daniel was probably just finishing his shift, tired and ready to go home. And in a few minutes, his whole world was about to change. Robert's hands were shaking. When was the last time he'd been this nervous? Maybe never. A knock at the door made him turn around. Come in. Patricia entered first, looking confused and concerned. Behind her came Daniel, still in his security uniform. His eyes went wide as he took in the massive office, the expensive furniture, the view. Then his gaze landed on Robert, and the confusion on his face was almost painful to watch. Mr. Chen wanted to see you, Patricia said to Daniel. I'll leave you two alone. She left, closing the door behind her. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Daniel stood near the door, looking between Robert and the room like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I'm sorry, sir, have we met? Did I do something wrong? Robert's throat felt tight. No, Daniel. You didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you did everything right. I don't understand. Please sit down. Robert gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Daniel sat slowly, his body tense, ready to bolt. Robert didn't sit behind his desk. That felt too much like a power play. Instead, he pulled a chair around and sat facing Daniel directly. 2 nights ago, Robert began, you met a man outside this hotel, a man in old clothes who looked like he was down on his luck. Do you remember? Daniel's eyes widened in recognition. That was you? Robert nodded. That was me. But why would you? Daniel trailed off, his mind clearly racing. I don't understand. Was this some kind of test? Yes, Robert admitted, and no. It started as a test, but it became something much more important. He told Daniel everything, about watching his staff roughly remove that elderly man from the lobby, about wondering how his employees would treat someone who appeared to have nothing, about the clothes from the thrift store, and the decision to see for himself. Daniel listened without interrupting, but Robert could see the emotions playing across his face. Confusion, hurt, anger. So I was an experiment? Daniel said finally, his voice tight. You were testing me. I was testing my company, Robert said. I was testing whether the values I thought I'd built into this business actually existed. And Daniel, you have every right to be angry with me. What I did was manipulative. It was wrong to deceive you. Yeah, it was, Daniel said, standing up. I told you things. Personal things. I gave you money I needed, and it was all fake? You were just playing pretend? The friendship wasn't fake, Robert said desperately, standing as well. Daniel, please. Everything you told me, everything we talked about, that was real. That mattered to me. What you showed me wasn't about money or tests or any of that. You showed me what kind of person you are. A fool, apparently, Daniel said bitterly. Someone you could trick. No, someone with more character than anyone else I've met in 20 years. Daniel shook his head, moving toward the door. I need to go. Wait, please, Robert's voice cracked. Just let me explain why this matters. Something in Robert's tone made Daniel pause, his hand on the doorknob. I grew up poor, Robert said. Really poor. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion just to keep us fed. I built this company because I wanted to prove that someone like me could make it, that I could be successful. But somewhere along the way, I forgot where I came from. I forgot what it felt like to struggle, to be invisible, to be dismissed. He walked closer to Daniel, his voice heavy with emotion. You gave me $20. Do you know what that $20 taught me? It taught me that I've been surrounding myself with people who only care about what I can do for them. People who smile and agree with everything I say because of my money. But you didn't know who I was and you still cared. You still helped. That's just basic human decency, Daniel said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. It should be, Robert agreed. But in my world, it's not. In my world, people step over each other to get ahead. They ignore suffering if it's inconvenient. They treat people like you, good, honest, hardworking people, like they're invisible. Daniel turned around slowly. So what now? You've proven your point. Your employees failed your test. Congratulations. Most of them failed, Robert corrected. But you didn't. You passed with flying colors. And now I want to do something about it. What do you mean? Robert took a deep breath. I want to offer you a job. A real job, not security. Something that pays what you deserve and gives you the chance to help other people the way you helped me. Daniel laughed. But it wasn't a happy sound. So this is what, guilt? Charity? It's recognition, Robert said firmly. You told me about being homeless. About how someone helped you. And you promised yourself you'd help others. What if you could do that as more than just a promise? What if that became your actual job? I don't understand what you're offering. I want to create a new position in my company. Director of Community Outreach. Your job would be to build programs that help people who are struggling. Employment programs for people experiencing homelessness. Partnerships with shelters. Job training. Whatever you think would make a real difference. Daniel stared at him. You're serious. Completely serious. I'll pay you a salary that will cover your mother's medical bills and your sister's education. Full benefits, health insurance, retirement plan. And you'll have a real budget to make these programs work. Why me? Daniel asked quietly. You could hire someone with experience, someone with a degree in social work or whatever. Because you've lived it, Robert said. Because you know what it's like to need help and not get it. Because you're the kind of person who gives away money you need to someone you just met. That's not something you can teach, Daniel. That's who you are. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his eyes glistening. I don't know if I can trust this. Trust you? I understand, Robert said. I broke your trust and I'm sorry. But I'm asking for a chance to earn it back. Not as your boss, but as someone who wants to be your friend. A real friend this time. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You really hurt me, you know. I thought you were someone who needed help. I wanted to help you. You did help me, Robert said softly. More than you know. You reminded me what it means to be human. What it means to care about people just because they're people. Not because of what they can do for you. I need time to think about this, Daniel said finally. Take all the time you need, Robert replied. But Daniel, whether you accept this job or not, whether you forgive me or not, I want you to know something. Meeting you changed my life. And I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure that people like you, people with good hearts who work hard and care about others, are valued the way they deserve to be. Daniel nodded slowly, then opened the door and left without another word. Robert stood alone in his office, staring at the closed door. He didn't know if Daniel would come back. He didn't know if he'd accept the job or if he'd ever forgive him, but he knew one thing for certain. He'd been tested by a security guard in a faded uniform, and he'd learned more from that test than from any business school or boardroom. He'd learned that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in kindness and character, in the willingness to help someone who can never pay you back. And that was a lesson worth more than all his billions. 3 days passed without a word from Daniel. 3 long days where Robert couldn't focus on anything else. He'd check his phone constantly, hoping for a call or a text. But there was nothing. His assistant noticed the change immediately. Sir, you've been distracted. Is everything okay? I'm fine, Robert lied. But he wasn't fine. He'd spent those 3 days thinking about Daniel's face when he realized the truth. The hurt in his eyes. The betrayal. On the 4th day, Robert made a decision. Even if Daniel never spoke to him again, even if he rejected the job offer, Robert was going to make changes anyway. He called an emergency meeting with his entire executive team. They gathered in the conference room looking confused. Robert rarely called last-minute meetings like this. "I need to talk to you all about something important," Robert began. "We're going to make some major changes to how we treat our employees." For the next hour, he laid out his plan. Raise the minimum wage for all hotel staff by 40%. Provide health insurance and retirement benefits to everyone, including part-time workers. Create a fund to help employees with unexpected medical expenses or family emergencies. Limit shifts to 8 hours with mandatory breaks. And most importantly, start a program to hire and train people who are experiencing homelessness or coming out of difficult circumstances. His CFO nearly had a heart attack. "Sir, do you realize how much this will cost? We're talking about millions of dollars across all our properties." "I don't care," Robert said firmly. "We can afford it. And it's the right thing to do. But the investors, if the investors have a problem with treating people with dignity, they can take their money elsewhere," Robert said. "These changes are happening." End of discussion. The room went silent. Some executives looked shocked. Others looked thoughtful. But no one argued further. After the meeting, Robert went back to his office and did something he hadn't done in years. He rolled up his sleeves and started working on the program himself. He researched homeless shelters, job training programs, and social services. He reached out to nonprofit organizations. He designed a curriculum that would give people real skills and real opportunities. He called it the Second Chance Initiative. And even if Daniel wanted nothing to do with it, Robert was going to make it happen. On the 5th day, Robert was at his desk reviewing training materials when his assistant buzzed him. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says his name is Daniel Rodriguez." Robert's heart jumped. "Send him in. Right away." A moment later, Daniel walked through the door. He looked nervous, his hands shoved in his pockets. But he looked Robert in the eye. "Hi," Daniel said. "Hi," Robert replied, standing up. "I'm glad you came." "Yeah, well, I've been thinking a lot." Daniel moved further into the room but didn't sit down. "What you did still bothers me. The lying, the pretending, that wasn't cool, I know, and I'm truly sorry. But," Daniel continued, "I've also been thinking about what you said, about wanting to help people. And I talked to my mom about it." "How is she?" Robert asked. "She's good, getting stronger every day." Daniel smiled slightly. "I told her everything that happened." "You know what she said?" She said, "Daniel, that man learned something important from you. Now maybe you can learn something important from him." Robert felt his chest tighten with emotion. "She reminded me that people make mistakes," Daniel went on, "and that what matters is what they do after. So I looked into you. I read articles about your company. I talked to some other employees here. And you know what I found?" "What?" "Most people think you're a pretty decent boss. Not perfect, but fair. And I heard that you just announced a bunch of changes. Big raises, better benefits, something about a new program." Robert nodded. "The Second Chance Initiative. I was going to do it with or without you, Daniel, because you were right. People deserve better." Daniel finally sat down and Robert saw him take a deep breath. "I want to accept your offer." "The job." Relief flooded through Robert. "Really?" "But I have conditions," Daniel said firmly. "First, I want to still work some security shifts. Maybe once a week. I don't want to forget where I came from or stop connecting with the people on the ground level." "Done," Robert said immediately. "Second, I want real authority to make decisions, not just be a figurehead while you run everything. If you're putting me in charge of this program, I need to actually be in charge." "Absolutely. You'll report directly to me and you'll have full control over the budget and decisions." "And third," Daniel paused, meeting Robert's eyes, "I need you to promise me something. No more tests, no more games. If we're going to work together, we do it honestly. Even when it's hard, even when the truth isn't comfortable." "I promise," Robert said, and he meant it with everything in him. "No more deception ever." Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay then. When do I start?" "How about Monday? That gives you a few days to wrap things up with your current position." They shook hands, and this time it felt different. Not like a billionaire and an employee. Like two people who'd found something rare. A genuine connection based on mutual respect. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "That night when we first met, when you were pretending, were you scared?" "Terrified," Robert admitted. Not of the test itself, but of what I might discover about my own company. About myself. And what did you discover? That I'd lost sight of what matters. That I'd built a successful business but forgotten the people who made it run. And that one security guard had more integrity in his little finger than all my wealthy friends combined. Daniel laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Don't sell yourself short. You could have just ignored what happened, gone back to your fancy life and forgotten all about it. But you didn't. That takes courage too. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Robert worked together to build the Second Chance initiative from the ground up. They visited shelters, talked to people who were struggling, and designed a program that would make a real difference. Daniel turned out to be a natural at the work. He knew how to talk to people, how to make them feel seen and valued. He understood their fears and challenges because he'd lived them, and he refused to let any bureaucracy or red tape get in the way of helping someone who needed it. The first person they hired through the program was a woman named Lisa, who'd been living in her car for 6 months after losing her job. Daniel personally trained her, encouraged her, and celebrated with her when she got her first paycheck. This is what it's all about, Daniel told Robert as they watched Lisa confidently interact with hotel guests at her new front desk position. Giving people a chance when everyone else has given up on them. Within 6 months, the Second Chance initiative had helped over 200 people find employment. Some worked at the hotels. Others were connected with partner companies that Robert had convinced to join the program. Every person got job training, professional clothes, and support services to help them succeed. The program cost money, yes. But something unexpected happened. Employee morale across all the hotels improved dramatically. Turnover dropped. Customer satisfaction scores went up. And the positive press generated by the initiative brought in more business than Robert had anticipated. His investors, the ones who'd been so worried about the costs, started calling to congratulate him on the brilliant PR move. Robert didn't bother correcting them. He knew the truth. This wasn't about PR. It was about doing what was right. One evening, about 8 months after that first meeting on the bench, Robert and Daniel sat in Robert's office, looking over the latest program results. 217 people, Daniel said, shaking his head in amazement. 217 lives changed. And that's just the beginning. It's all because of you, Robert said. Your vision, your heart, your leadership. No, Daniel corrected. It's because of us. You had the resources and the power to make it happen. I just helped point the way. We needed each other. Robert looked at this young man who'd become his closest friend and most trusted colleague. You know what the funny thing is? I thought I was testing you that night. But really, you were testing me. You showed me what I'd become and gave me a chance to be better. We're all just trying to be better, Daniel said with a smile, one day at a time. Daniel's mother had fully recovered, her medical bills paid off. His sister graduated college debt-free and got her dream job as a teacher. And Daniel himself had become a respected voice in the community, speaking at events and inspiring other companies to create similar programs. But he still worked one security shift a week, just like he'd promised. He'd stand at that same entrance where he'd first met Robert, greeting guests and employees alike with the same warmth and kindness he'd always shown. And sometimes, late at night when the hotel was quiet, Robert would join him. They'd sit on that bench and talk about life, about dreams, about the future they were building together. You changed my life, Robert told him one evening. You changed mine too, Daniel replied. I guess that's what real friendship does. It changes both people. Robert thought about that $20 bill, about a protein bar and a bottle of water offered with genuine care, about how a simple act of kindness had led to all of this. Hundreds of people with jobs and hope and second chances, a company transformed, a friendship that had become the most valuable thing in his life. He'd tested kindness in disguise and learned that true wealth isn't found in bank accounts or stock portfolios. It's found in the connections we make, the lives we touch, and the courage to be better than we were yesterday. And that lesson, taught by a security guard in a faded uniform, was worth more than all the billions in the world.